You think people mellow with age, that they get softer, wiser. That might be true for most folks, but for a narcissist, old age isn't a mellowing process. It's a pressure cooker. The cracks in their mask don't just show, they shatter. And that is a dangerous and ugly sight to behold. Let me tell you something straight up. I've been doing this for decades, and I've seen every kind of personality disorder walk through my door. But there's something particularly unsettling about watching a narcissist age. While the rest of us might slow down, reflect on our mistakes, maybe even develop some humility, the narcissist does the exact opposite. They don't get better with age, they get desperate. And desperate people do dangerous things. Here's what's really happening underneath all that deteriorating charm and fading charisma. The narcissist's entire identity, their whole sense of self-worth, has been built on external validation. They've spent their entire adult life like a vampire, feeding off the admiration, fear, and attention of others. But here's the brutal truth about aging. All those sources of what we call narcissistic supply start drying up faster than a puddle in the Texas heat. Think about it. What made them feel powerful and important when they were younger? Maybe it was their looks, that magnetic charm that could walk into a room and command attention. Well, time doesn't care about your ego. Those looks fade. The mirror becomes their enemy instead of their best friend. That body that once turned heads now creaks and complains. They can't rely on their physical presence to dominate a room anymore. Or maybe their supply came from their position of power. The corner office, the title, the authority to make people jump when they said jump. But retirement doesn't just take away their paycheck, it strips away their identity. Nobody has to listen to them anymore. Nobody has to pretend to care about their opinions. The phone stops ringing, the invitations dry up, and suddenly they're just another senior citizen at the grocery store, invisible and irrelevant. And here's where it gets really dangerous. Most people, when they lose these external sources of validation, they turn inward. They develop wisdom, spirituality, genuine relationships based on who they are, not what they can do for others. But a narcissist, they can't do that because there's nothing inside to turn to. Their entire sense of self has been built on that external supply, and when it's gone, they don't just feel sad, they feel like they're dying. This is why aging is the narcissist's worst nightmare. It's not just about getting older, it's about losing everything that made them feel alive. The loss of looks, the loss of power, the loss of relevance, these aren't just inconveniences to them. These are existential threats. And when a narcissist feels threatened, they don't retreat gracefully. They fight dirty. Physical and mental decline doesn't bring them humility like it might for the rest of us. It brings panic. Raw, desperate panic. They can't charm their way out of a failing body. They can't intimidate time itself. They can't manipulate their way back to youth and vitality. For the first time in their lives, they're facing something they can't control, can't spin, can't blame on someone else. But here's what makes this whole situation so toxic for everyone around them. They don't accept this reality. Instead of facing the truth about aging and mortality like mature adults, they become increasingly desperate. Think of it this way. Imagine an addict whose dealer just moved to another country. They don't just quit cold turkey and find a new hobby. They become more frantic, more willing to do anything, hurt anyone, burn any bridge to get their next fix. That's exactly what happens with an aging narcissist. Their toxic behaviors don't decrease as they get weaker. They escalate out of sheer desperation. They become like a cornered animal, and cornered animals are the most dangerous kind. They will do anything to get that validation, that attention, that sense of power back, even if it means destroying every relationship they have left, even if it means burning down everything around them. I want you to stop for a second. Think about the narcissist in your life. Go down to the comments right now and tell me, what is the one thing they used to rely on for attention that they are now losing their grip on? Is it their looks, their job title, power over their children? Let's call it out. Because understanding what they're losing is the key to understanding why they're becoming more unbearable, more manipulative, more cruel as they age. It's not random meanness, it's calculated desperation. They're fighting for their psychological survival, and they don't care who gets hurt in the process. This is the heart of why the mellowing with age myth is not just wrong when it comes to narcissists, it's dangerous. It keeps us expecting them to get better, to become the grandparent or parent we always hoped they'd become. But hope without reality is just delusion, and that delusion keeps us in the line of fire. We're about to break down the 7 signs that this pressure cooker is about to blow. This isn't just theory, this is a warning. You need to know what you're dealing with, because the collapse of a narcissist is not a quiet event, it's a hurricane, and hurricanes don't discriminate about what they destroy. Well, we've all seen the narcissistic rage. But what happens when the filter is completely gone, when the fear of consequences no longer exists? Let me paint you a picture here. You know that controlled anger a narcissist used to have? That calculated intimidation where they'd raise their voice just enough to make you uncomfortable, slam a door just hard enough to make their point, but never quite cross the line into behavior that would get them arrested or fired. Well, throw that rule book out the window. When a narcissist starts losing their grip on power and influence, that strategic rage turns into something much more primitive and dangerous. Here's what's really happening behind this explosion of unfiltered fury. Throughout their adult life, narcissists have been master manipulators of their own image. They knew exactly how far they could push, how loud they could yell, how much they could intimidate without facing real consequences. They had jobs to protect, reputations to maintain, social circles that might judge them. These were their invisible restraints, keeping their rage somewhat contained. But aging strips away these natural buffers. They're retired, so they can't get fired. Their social circle has already shrunk because they've driven most people away over the years. Their physical intimidation factor is diminished. So what used to be calculated outbursts become raw, unhinged explosions over the most trivial things. And I mean trivial. We're talking about losing their minds over a TV remote that's been moved. Flying into a rage because the room temperature isn't exactly what they want. Having a complete meltdown because someone didn't follow their precise instructions about how to fold a towel. These aren't rational responses to genuine problems. These are desperate attempts to exert control over anything, absolutely anything, in their shrinking world. Think about it this way. When you're used to controlling big things, people's careers, family decisions, major life choices, and suddenly you can't even control whether your adult children visit you for the holidays, you start grabbing for control over smaller and smaller things. The TV remote becomes a symbol of power. The thermostat becomes a battlefield. Every tiny detail of daily life becomes a hill they're willing to die on. But here's where it gets really ugly. This isn't just frustration or confusion from aging. This is calculated emotional terrorism designed to make everyone around them walk on eggshells. They've learned that if they explode unpredictably and violently enough, people will do anything to avoid triggering another episode. It's psychological warfare, plain and simple. I've seen this play out in real life more times than I can count. The aging parent who screams at a waitress until she's in tears because the coffee took 30 seconds too long to arrive. The retired executive who has a complete breakdown in the grocery store, yelling at a teenage cashier about prices he can't control. The grandmother who launches into a screaming fit at a family dinner over some perceived slight that nobody else even noticed. Now, your first instinct might be to think, well, maybe they're just struggling with the changes that come with getting older. Maybe they're scared or confused. Stop right there. That's exactly the trap they want you to fall into. Because when you start making excuses for their behavior, when you start walking around them like you're defusing a bomb, you're giving them exactly what they want, control through fear. This isn't old age grumpiness. Grumpy old people complain and move on. This isn't dementia or cognitive decline. Those conditions might make someone confused or frustrated, but they don't turn someone into a calculated emotional terrorist. This is a narcissist who's losing their traditional sources of power and has decided that raw intimidation is their new weapon of choice. The retired boss who used to get his validation from boardroom power plays now terrorizes his family over dinner conversations. The aging beauty queen who used to command attention with her looks now creates chaos and drama to force people to focus on her. They're not losing their minds, they're adapting their manipulation tactics to their new circumstances. Here's what you need to understand about these rage episodes. They're not random, they're strategic. Notice how they never have these explosive fits when they're alone. Notice how the rage is always directed at people they think they can intimidate: family members, service workers, people they perceive as beneath them socially. You'll never see them screaming at a police officer or their doctor in quite the same way. When you see this rage, do not engage, do not try to reason with them, do not try to calm them down. Recognize it for what it is: a symptom of desperation. Your job isn't to put out the fire. Your job is to get out of the way so you don't get burned. Because here's the brutal truth: this behavior is only going to escalate. As their world continues to shrink, as they lose more and more of their traditional power sources, these explosions will become more frequent and more intense. You can't love them out of it. You can't reason with them, and you certainly can't fix them. All you can do is protect yourself from the shrapnel. A narcissist always plays the victim. But in old age, it's no longer a tactic, it becomes their entire identity. Their life story becomes an epic saga of how the world has done them wrong. Now, let me be crystal clear about something here. We've all met people who've genuinely suffered hardships and found the strength to rise above them. That's not what we're talking about. What I'm describing is something much more toxic and deliberate. The aging narcissist doesn't just experience setbacks, they weaponize every single disappointment, every health issue, every relationship failure into ammunition for their ongoing pity party. Here's how this transformation happens. Throughout their younger years, narcissists used victimhood strategically. They'd pull out the victim card when they needed sympathy, when they wanted to avoid accountability, or when they needed to manipulate someone into doing what they wanted. It was one tool in their toolbox, used when convenient, but as they age and their other manipulation tactics lose their effectiveness, victimhood stops being a strategy and becomes their entire worldview. Every story they tell becomes a tale of persecution. Every health problem isn't just a natural part of aging. It's evidence of how unfairly life has treated them. That diabetes, it's not because of decades of poor eating habits. It's because of all the stress their ungrateful family put them through. That heart condition, it's not genetics or lifestyle choices. It's because they worked so hard to provide for everyone else while getting nothing in return. And here's where it gets really insidious. They don't just complain about current problems, they completely rewrite their entire life history through this victim lens. Suddenly, every choice they made, every relationship they destroyed, every bridge they burned becomes someone else's fault. They weren't abusive parents. They were overwhelmed providers who sacrificed everything. They weren't manipulative spouses. They were devoted partners who gave and gave until they had nothing left. The financial struggles they're facing, that's not because they spent recklessly or failed to plan for retirement. No. That's because their children are selfish and don't appreciate everything that was done for them. The fact that family members don't visit often, that's not because of years of toxic behavior. That's because this generation doesn't respect their elders. Every consequence of their actions gets flipped into evidence of their martyrdom. But here's what makes this so particularly cruel and effective. They use their age and their ailments as emotional weapons. Suddenly, every ache and pain becomes a guilt trip. Every doctor's appointment becomes a performance designed to extract sympathy and attention. They've learned that being old and sick gives them a certain social immunity. People feel guilty for not being more understanding, more patient, more giving. Their favorite catchphrases become weapons of mass manipulation. "After all I've done for you" becomes the opening line to every conversation where they want something. "No one understands what I've been through" becomes their response to any attempt at setting boundaries. "I won't be around much longer" becomes their trump card when they want to force compliance through guilt. And let me tell you something, they are absolutely masterful at reading their audience. They know exactly which buttons to push with each person. With one child, they'll emphasize their loneliness. With another, they'll focus on their health problems. With the neighbor, they'll play up how abandoned they feel by their family. They're like emotional chameleons, adapting their victim story to whatever will get them the most sympathy from each particular audience. Here's what's really happening psychologically. They cannot and will not accept responsibility for the consequences of a lifetime of toxic behavior. The idea that their loneliness, their financial problems, their health issues, their fractured relationships might be the natural result of their own choices is absolutely unthinkable to them. So instead, they construct this elaborate narrative where they are the hero who sacrificed everything only to be betrayed and abandoned by an ungrateful world. This isn't just self-pity, this is historical revisionism on a personal scale. They're not just feeling sorry for themselves, they're actively rewriting the past to support their delusion of innocence. Every memory gets filtered through this victim lens until they genuinely believe their own propaganda. And here's the trap they're setting for you. They want you to feel guilty for not doing more, not caring more, not sacrificing more for their comfort and happiness. They turn care into an obligation, not an act of love. They want you to believe that questioning their version of events makes you cruel, that setting boundaries makes you heartless, that protecting your own well-being makes you selfish. They aren't just telling a sad story, they are rewriting history to make themselves the perpetual hero victim. And you will be cast as the villain if you don't play along with their script. Every interaction becomes a test of your loyalty to their delusion, and failing that test makes you just another person who's wronged them in their epic tale of persecution. You thought they were suspicious before. As they age and lose control of their environment, the aging narcissist becomes pathologically paranoid. Let me tell you something about paranoia. It's not just being suspicious or cautious. Real paranoia is when you start seeing conspiracies where none exist, when you interpret every innocent action as a deliberate attack against you. And for the aging narcissist, paranoia becomes their default operating system. Here's what's driving this psychological shift. Remember, narcissists have spent their entire lives believing they're the center of everyone else's universe. In their mind, people are always thinking about them, always plotting either for them or against them. When they were younger and had more power, they could maintain the illusion that people were constantly focused on pleasing them, impressing them, or trying to get something from them. But as their social circle shrinks, and make no mistake, it shrinks because they've systematically driven people away over the years. They can't maintain that illusion anymore. People aren't calling as much, visiting as often, or seeking their approval. Now, a normal person might realize that this is just the natural consequence of their own toxic behavior. But a narcissist, they can't accept that explanation because it would require admitting fault. So instead, they create a different narrative. People aren't avoiding them because they're difficult to be around. People are conspiring against them. It's not that their adult children are busy with their own lives. It's that those children are deliberately plotting to exclude them. It's not that their neighbors are just living their own lives. It's that those neighbors are watching them, judging them, maybe even planning something sinister. This paranoia feeds on itself and grows stronger with every passing day. The natural memory loss that comes with aging becomes evidence that people are deliberately hiding things from them. They can't remember where they put their keys. Someone must have moved them. They can't recall a conversation from last week. Someone is deliberately keeping information from them. Their bank account doesn't look right. Someone must be stealing their money. And let me be clear about something. This isn't dementia or normal age-related cognitive decline. People with genuine cognitive issues might be confused, but they don't typically develop elaborate conspiracy theories about everyone around them. This is a narcissist's ego protection system working overtime. Watch how this paranoia manifests in their daily life. They start accusing family members of stealing their money or possessions. not just valuable things. Mind you, they'll accuse someone of stealing a $20 bill, a piece of jewelry they haven't worn in years, or even something as mundane as a kitchen utensil. It's not really about the missing item. It's about having someone to blame for their feelings of powerlessness and confusion. They become convinced that their doctors are incompetent or malicious. Every diagnosis becomes evidence of a conspiracy. The doctor who tells them they need to take better care of their health isn't giving sound medical advice. That doctor is part of some plot to control them or take their money. The medications they're prescribed aren't meant to help them. They're designed to keep them weak and dependent. Their neighbors become the enemy. Every action is interpreted through a lens of persecution. The neighbor who doesn't wave enthusiastically enough is obviously snubbing them. The neighbor who does try to be friendly is obviously fake and probably up to something. If packages get delivered to the wrong address, it's not an honest mistake by the delivery driver. It's evidence that the neighbors are intercepting their mail. Here's what makes this particularly dangerous for family members. The paranoia doesn't stay focused on strangers. It eventually turns inward toward the people closest to them. The adult child who tries to help with their finances becomes suspect number one for theft. The spouse who tries to manage their medications becomes part of a plot to poison them. The grandchild who doesn't call often enough is obviously being turned against them by their parents. They start seeing patterns and connections that simply don't exist. If two family members have a private conversation, it must be about them. If someone seems distracted during a visit, they must be planning something. If anyone questions their version of events, they must be part of the conspiracy too. This paranoia creates a perfect storm of isolation. The more paranoid they become, the more they push people away. The more people they push away, the more evidence they have that everyone is against them. It's a vicious cycle that feeds on itself until they're living in a completely distorted reality where they are the central victim in an elaborate plot that involves virtually everyone in their life. This isn't just mistrust. This is a complete break from reality where they are the central character in a conspiracy of their own making. And arguing with them about it is as useless as arguing with a brick wall. You can't reason someone out of a paranoid delusion because paranoia isn't based on logic. It's based on their desperate need to blame everyone else for their isolation and unhappiness. They've always felt entitled. But with age, they get the ultimate trump card. I'm old, therefore I am owed. Their sense of entitlement becomes absolute and non-negotiable. Now, let me tell you something about entitlement. We've all met entitled people, those folks who think the world owes them something just for existing. But when a narcissist ages, their entitlement doesn't just increase, it becomes weaponized. Age becomes their ultimate justification for demanding whatever they want, whenever they want it, from whoever they want it from. Here's the twisted logic they operate under. They believe that simply reaching old age gives them a free pass for all bad behavior. They think age entitles them to cut in line at the grocery store, be rude to service workers, demand your time and money without question, and treat everyone around them like personal servants. In their mind, they've earned the right to be difficult, demanding, and downright cruel. They've got this narrative running in their heads that says, I've paid my dues, now it's time for the world to pay up. But here's what they conveniently forget. Paying your dues means contributing positively to society, treating people with respect, building meaningful relationships based on mutual care and consideration. What they've actually done is spend decades taking from others, manipulating situations to their advantage, and leaving a trail of damaged relationships in their wake. But in their rewritten version of history, they were the ones who sacrificed everything. They were the ones who worked hard, who gave selflessly, who put everyone else's needs before their own. So now, in their golden years, they believe it's payback time. Everyone owes them, and they're here to collect with interest. Watch how this plays out in real life. They expect you to drop everything the moment they call. Doesn't matter if you're at work, dealing with your own family crisis, or simply trying to have a moment of peace. If they want something, you should be grateful for the opportunity to serve them. If you can't immediately accommodate their demands, you're selfish, ungrateful, and obviously don't care about them. The financial demands become particularly insidious. They expect their adult children to subsidize their lifestyle, pay for their entertainment, cover their medical expenses, and do it all with a smile and without question. They've convinced themselves that their children should be honored to support them because, after all, didn't they feed and clothe those children when they were young? Never mind that feeding and clothing your children is called basic parenting, not some extraordinary sacrifice that creates a lifetime debt. And here's where it gets really manipulative. They frame these demands not as requests, but as obligations. As obligations, they're not asking for help, they're collecting what's rightfully theirs. When you give them money, they don't express gratitude because in their mind, you're simply paying back what you owe them. When you spend time with them, they don't appreciate it as a gift. They see it as the minimum acceptable payment on your debt to them. Any refusal to meet their demands is seen as a deep personal betrayal. You're not just saying no to a request, you're stealing from them. You're not setting reasonable boundaries, you're being cruel and heartless. They take your no as evidence that you don't love them, don't respect them, and clearly don't understand how much they've sacrificed for you over the years. This entitlement extends far beyond family relationships. They expect special treatment everywhere they go. The restaurant should comp their meal if they complain loud enough. The store should give them discounts just because they're elderly. The government should provide them with services they never paid into. Everyone, everywhere owes them something simply because they've managed to survive into old age. But here's what's really happening underneath all this demanding behavior. They're not actually feeling entitled, they're feeling desperate. They're watching their power, influence, and independence slip away, and demanding special treatment is their way of trying to maintain some sense of control and importance. But instead of honestly addressing their fears about aging and mortality, they externalize all of it onto everyone around them. The tragedy is that this behavior pushes away the very people who might genuinely want to help them. When you turn every interaction into a transaction, when you treat love as a debt that needs to be repaid, when you show no gratitude for the kindness others show you, you create an environment where people start avoiding you not out of cruelty but out of self-preservation. This is not the respect we afford our elders. Respect is earned through a lifetime of treating others with dignity, showing appreciation for kindness, and maintaining relationships based on mutual care. This is a tax a narcissist levies on everyone around them for the privilege of their presence. They've turned aging into a weapon, and they're using it to extract from others what they feel they're owed, regardless of whether they've actually earned it. What happens when the old wells of supply run dry? The aging narcissist doesn't give up. They start drilling frantically and recklessly for new sources. Let me paint you a picture of desperation in action. You've got a narcissist whose traditional sources of validation are drying up faster than a creek in a drought. Their spouse is either gone or completely worn down from decades of emotional abuse. Their children have either gone no contact or maintain only the bare minimum relationship necessary to avoid guilt. Their old friends and colleagues have moved on with their lives. So what does a narcissist do when faced with this psychological starvation? They go hunting for fresh meat. Here's what you need to understand about narcissistic supply. It's like a drug addiction, and these people cannot function without it. They need constant validation, attention, admiration, or even just the power to control and manipulate others. When their usual sources are no longer available or viable, they don't just accept the loneliness and work on developing genuine relationships. That would require actual self-reflection and change, which is absolutely beyond their capability. Instead, they become predators looking for new hosts. And they're not picky about who becomes their next victim. They'll latch on to anyone who shows them even the smallest amount of kindness or attention. The new neighbor who made the mistake of being friendly. The home health aide who's just trying to do their job professionally. a distant relative they haven't spoken to in years, someone from their church or community center who doesn't know their history. Watch how they operate when they identify a potential new source. This is where you'll see them pull out all the stops with what we call love bombing. They will shower this new person with an intensity of attention and affection that seems completely out of proportion to the actual relationship. They'll call them constantly, bring them little gifts, tell them how wonderful they are, how much they mean to them, how they're the only person who truly understands them. But here's the sinister part: they're not actually interested in this person as an individual. They're interested in what this person can provide for them. The new target isn't seen as a human being with their own needs, feelings, and boundaries. They're seen as a resource to be mined for attention, sympathy, and validation. And they're absolutely shameless about the stories they'll tell to hook these new victims. They'll portray themselves as tragic figures who've been abandoned and mistreated by their ungrateful families. They'll spin elaborate tales about how they were the perfect parent, the devoted spouse, the generous friend, only to be betrayed and cast aside by people who didn't appreciate their sacrifices. The new target, not knowing the real history, often feels sorry for this poor, lonely old person and gets drawn into trying to help. They start spending more time with the narcissist, listening to their complaints, maybe even helping with errands or providing emotional support. What they don't realize is that they're being systematically groomed to become the narcissist's new primary source of supply. Here's where it gets really dangerous for families. The narcissist will use this new relationship as a weapon against their existing family members. They'll constantly compare everyone unfavorably to their new friend. They'll make comments like, "Well, at least someone cares about me," or "I'm so grateful to have found a real friend after being surrounded by such selfish people." They'll also start sharing family secrets and private information with this new person, often twisted to make the family look bad and themselves look like martyrs. They're not just seeking comfort from a friend, they're recruiting an ally in their ongoing war against anyone who's ever tried to set boundaries with them. But here's the tragedy for the new victim: this honeymoon phase never lasts. Once the narcissist feels secure that they've hooked this new source of supply, the mask starts to slip. The person who seems so grateful and loving starts becoming demanding and critical. The phone calls become more frequent and more intrusive. The requests for help become more elaborate and time-consuming. The guilt trips start when the new victim can't always be available. They cannot stand to be alone with their own thoughts. The silence is terrifying because without external validation, they're forced to confront the emptiness inside themselves. So they will do absolutely anything to avoid that psychological isolation, even if it means completely manipulating and eventually destroying someone who genuinely tried to help them. This isn't them making new friends. This is a predator looking for a new host because the old one is no longer viable. And they will not hesitate to cause chaos and division to protect this new source of supply. They'll turn family members against each other, spread lies and gossip, and create drama wherever necessary to maintain their position as the center of attention and the recipient of care and concern. As the end of life approaches, most people reflect. A narcissist doesn't reflect, they reconstruct. They go on a history revision tour to cement their legacy as flawless. Now let me tell you something about the difference between reflection and reconstruction. When healthy people get older, they look back on their lives with honesty. They remember their mistakes, feel genuine remorse for the people they've hurt, maybe even reach out to make amends. They understand that their legacy isn't just about how they want to be remembered, but about the actual impact they had on the people around them. But a narcissist, they can't handle that kind of honest self-examination because it would shatter their entire sense of self. So instead of reflecting on their life, they set about systematically rewriting it. This isn't just wishful thinking or rose-colored nostalgia. This is a deliberate, calculated campaign to control how they'll be remembered, and they'll bulldoze anyone who gets in the way of their revised narrative. Here's what's driving this desperate need to rewrite history. They cannot stand the thought of being remembered for who they truly are. The idea that people might remember them as manipulative, abusive, selfish, or cruel is absolutely unbearable to them. So they embark on what I call their legacy tour, a final attempt to win by controlling everyone else's memory. Watch how this plays out in their conversations. They'll start telling stories about the past, but the stories keep changing to make them look better. The time they screamed at their child until that child was in tears, that gets rewritten as firm but loving discipline. The years of emotional manipulation and control, that becomes sacrificing everything to keep the family together. The pattern of choosing their own needs over everyone else's, that transforms into always putting family first. And here's where it gets particularly cruel for adult children. The narcissist will look their own child in the eye and flatly deny events that child lived through. I never did that. That's not how it happened. Your memory is terrible. They're not just disagreeing about details. They're telling their victims that their entire childhood reality was a lie. This is psychological warfare at its most vicious. Imagine living through years of abuse, manipulation, and emotional neglect, finally getting to a place where you understand what happened to you, maybe even getting therapy to work through the trauma, and then having the person who caused all that damage tell you it never happened. They're not just denying their behavior, they're denying your experience, your pain, your truth. But it gets worse. They don't just deny the bad stuff, they actively reconstruct themselves as the hero of every story. They weren't absent parents, they were hard-working providers. They weren't emotionally abusive, they were teaching important life lessons. They weren't manipulative, they were protecting their family from outside threats. Every toxic behavior gets repackaged as a virtue. They'll retell family stories with themselves cast as the misunderstood genius, the benevolent parent, the devoted spouse who gave everything and got nothing in return. They'll claim credit for their children's successes while denying any responsibility for their struggles. They'll portray themselves as victims of an ungrateful family who never appreciated their sacrifices. And here's what makes this so insidious. They often do this rewriting in front of other people. They'll tell these revised stories to grandchildren, to neighbors, to anyone who will listen. They're not just trying to convince themselves, they're trying to create an alternative version of history that others will remember and repeat. This is profoundly damaging to adult children who are made to feel like they're going crazy. They remember the fear, the walking on eggshells, the constant criticism and manipulation. But now they're being told by the very person who caused that trauma that it never happened, or if it did happen, it was justified and necessary. The gaslighting becomes even more intense during this phase because now it's not just about current behavior, it's about rewriting decades of family history. They'll use phrases like, "You always had such an active imagination," or "You were such a sensitive child, you took everything the wrong way," or "I don't know where you get these ideas from." They are not misremembering. They are actively and consciously rewriting the past to fit their delusional self-image. It is the final and most cruel act of gaslighting. They're trying to steal not just their victim's future peace, but their past truth as well. This is their last desperate attempt to control the narrative, even if it means destroying their children's sense of reality in the process. And so we come to the final, most tragic sign. What happens when all the walls come down? The narcissistic collapse. Let me be very clear about what we're witnessing here. This isn't just depression, although it might look like it on the surface. This isn't just the normal sadness that can come with aging, illness, or loss. What we're talking about is the complete implosion of the false self that the narcissist has spent their entire life constructing and maintaining. Think about it this way. Imagine spending 70 or 80 years building an elaborate house of cards, constantly adding new levels, constantly shoring up weak spots, constantly rearranging the structure to keep it from falling down. Then imagine what happens when the foundation finally gives way. So that's what narcissistic collapse looks like, the complete destruction of everything they've used to define themselves. Here's what this collapse can look like in real life. Sometimes it manifests as a deep, sullen withdrawal from the world. They become unreachable, unresponsive, sitting in their chair or lying in their bed, staring at nothing. They've stopped fighting because they've finally realized that all their manipulation tactics, all their rage, all their victim stories aren't working anymore. The world has moved on without them, and they're left alone with the reality they've spent a lifetime avoiding. Other times, the collapse shows up as a parade of mysterious physical complaints. Suddenly, they're sick all the time, but the doctors can't find anything definitively wrong. They're not faking these symptoms. The psychological collapse is literally making them physically ill. Their body is manifesting the internal breakdown they can't otherwise express. But sometimes the collapse takes the form of one final, bitter rage against the world. This isn't the calculated anger we talked about earlier. This is the fury of someone who's finally realized that their life was built on lies, that they've wasted decades chasing validation that never truly satisfied them, that they've destroyed every meaningful relationship they ever had. It's the rage of someone who understands, perhaps for the first time, that they are alone and that it's their own fault. They become what I can only describe as a black hole of misery. No amount of love, attention, or care can fill the void inside them, because that void has been there their entire life, just covered up by all the narcissistic behaviors we've been talking about. Now that those behaviors have stopped working, the emptiness is finally exposed, and it's absolutely devastating to witness. But here's where this becomes dangerous for everyone around them. Their collapse doesn't happen in isolation. Their bitterness, their rage, their profound unhappiness become contagious. If you're still emotionally connected to them, if you're still trying to fix them or save them or make them happy, their misery will pull you down with them. This is what I call the contagion effect. Misery doesn't just love company, it actively recruits it. They will try to drag everyone around them into their emotional black hole. They'll want you to be as angry as they are, as bitter as they are, as hopeless as they are. Because if they have to face the reality of what their life has become, they don't want to do it alone. And here's the brutal truth that nobody wants to hear: you cannot stop this decline. This collapse is the inevitable end result of a life built on manipulation, control, and the exploitation of others. You cannot love them out of it. You cannot therapy them out of it. You cannot sacrifice enough of yourself to fill the void inside them. This is the natural consequence of choosing to live as a predator rather than as a genuine human being. Your job is not to catch them when they fall. Your job is to step out of the way of the falling debris. Your responsibility is to your own sanity, to your own life, to your own future. If you allow yourself to be pulled into their collapse, if you sacrifice your mental health trying to save someone who spent decades destroying everyone around them, you're not being loving or loyal, you're being foolish. This is the final move in dealing with an aging narcissist. Recognizing that their collapse is not your emergency. Their lifetime of choices has led them to this point, and no amount of guilt, obligation, or misplaced compassion on your part is going to change that outcome. Let them face their reality. You go live yours. That's not cruel, that's survival. You cannot stop this decline. It is the inevitable end of a life built on a lie. Your job is not to fix their collapse, but to save yourself from being pulled down with them.